Captain Rachel Martinez had always known that being one of the few female pilots in the elite strike fighter squadron would come with challenges, but she never expected betrayal from within her own unit. As she performed her pre-flight checks on the rain-soaked tarmac of Naval Air Station Oceana, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mission briefing had been unusually tense, with Commander Derek Thompson barely making eye contact with her while explaining their training exercise objectives. Rachel had earned her place in VFA 143 through sheer determination and skill. Growing up in a small Texas town where her father worked as a mechanic, she'd spent countless hours learning about aircraft engines and dreaming of the day she'd pilot her own jet. After graduating top of her class from the Naval Academy and excelling in flight training, she'd finally achieved her goal of flying the F-18 Super Hornet. But acceptance hadn't come easily. From her first day with the squadron, some of the male pilots had made it clear they didn't believe she belonged. They questioned her abilities during briefings, excluded her from informal gatherings, and made subtle comments about how the Navy was lowering standards to accommodate women. Rachel had endured it all, knowing that proving herself in the air was the only way to earn their respect. The tension had escalated 3 weeks earlier when Rachel had been selected over Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison for a prestigious assignment to participate in red flag exercises in Nevada. Morrison, a 15-year veteran with connections throughout the squadron, had expected the assignment to be his. His reaction to Rachel's selection had been swift and vindictive. He'd begun spreading rumors about her qualifications and suggesting that her selection was based on political correctness rather than merit. Commander Thompson, Morrison's longtime friend and drinking buddy, had started scrutinizing Rachel's performance reports more closely, looking for any excuse to justify Morrison's claims. Rachel noticed that her minor mistakes were being documented, while similar errors by male pilots were overlooked. The hostile atmosphere was affecting her confidence, but she refused to let them break her spirit. As Rachel completed her walk-around inspection, she noticed Morrison and Thompson engaged in an intense conversation near the squadron building. Their body language suggested they were planning something, and the way they kept glancing in her direction made her uneasy. She'd overheard fragments of conversations suggesting that some of the pilots were planning to teach her a lesson during training exercises. The mission for today was a complex air-to-air combat training scenario. Rachel's flight of 4 aircraft was designated as the Blue Force, tasked with defending a high-value target from an attacking Red Force of 6 F-18s. What she didn't know was that Morrison had convinced several pilots to deviate from the planned exercise. They intended to overwhelm her flight with aggressive tactics that pushed the boundaries of safety regulations, hoping to force her into making mistakes that would justify questioning her capabilities. Rachel strapped into her aircraft, call sign Phoenix 1, and began her engine start procedures. The familiar rumble of the twin General Electric engines provided some comfort as she prepared for what she sensed would be more than just a routine training mission. The morning briefing had covered the exercise parameters, but Rachel suspected that not all the pilots would follow the rules of engagement. She'd noticed subtle exchanges between Morrison and several other pilots, and their confident smirks suggested they had their own agenda. As she taxied toward the runway, Rachel made a mental note to stay extra vigilant and trust her instincts. Her wingman, Lieutenant Alex Rodriguez, had always been supportive and professional. During their taxi checks, he expressed concerns about the unusual formation assignments for the exercise. Normally, experienced pilots were distributed evenly between opposing forces, but today's Red Force consisted entirely of Morrison's allies. Rachel appreciated Alex's loyalty, but she knew he would follow orders regardless of his personal feelings about the situation. As they held short of the runway, waiting for takeoff clearance, Rachel reviewed the mission objectives one final time. Her flight was to patrol a designated area and intercept any hostile aircraft attempting to penetrate their airspace. The Red Force would launch 15 minutes later and attempt to complete a simulated strike mission. Standard rules of engagement applied, with all weapons simulated and safety being paramount. The tower cleared them for takeoff, and Rachel advanced her throttles to military power. The F-18 accelerated down the runway with its characteristic roar, and she felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft lifting off the ground. As they climbed to their assigned altitude, Rachel couldn't help but wonder what Morrison and his conspirators had planned for her. The weather was perfect for flying, with clear skies and excellent visibility. Rachel's flight established their patrol pattern and waited for the opposing force to appear on their radar screens. She used the time to review her tactical options and mentally prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her three wingmen maintained professional radio discipline, but she could sense their tension through their clipped communications. 25 minutes into the exercise, Rachel's radar warning receiver began chirping, indicating that multiple aircraft were painting her flight with their fire control radars. This was unusual, as the Red Force typically tried to maintain stealth until they were in optimal attack positions. The aggressive radar emissions suggested they were abandoning subtlety in favor of overwhelming force. Captain Martinez's suspicions proved correct when 6 F-18s appeared on her radar display, all converging on her flight's position simultaneously. This wasn't the gradual engagement typical of training exercises. It was a coordinated ambush designed to overwhelm her small force. The Red Force had violated several tactical norms by approaching from multiple directions at once, creating a dangerous situation that pushed the boundaries of safe training practices. Rachel immediately called out the threats to her flight and began implementing defensive maneuvers. Her years of training kicked in as she analyzed the tactical situation and formulated a response. The Red Force's aggressive approach had given away their positions prematurely, which she could exploit if she acted quickly and decisively. Lieutenant Rodriguez acknowledged her calls and moved to support her defensive actions. The other two pilots in her flight, Lieutenant Sarah Chen and Lieutenant Marcus Wilson, also responded professionally despite the unusual circumstances. Rachel felt grateful for their trust and support as they prepared to face overwhelming odds. The first wave of simulated missile attacks came from 3 different directions simultaneously. Rachel's flight executed a complex series of maneuvers to evade the attacks while maintaining their defensive formation. The Red Force pilots were clearly pushing the exercise beyond normal parameters, using tactics that prioritized aggression over safety. As the engagement intensified, Rachel noticed that the Red Force was not following standard training protocols. Their formations were too tight, their approach speeds too high, and their simulated weapon employment was occurring at dangerously close ranges. She began to realize that Morrison's group was deliberately creating hazardous conditions, hoping to force her into making a mistake or panic. Despite the irregular nature of the engagement, Rachel maintained her composure and continued to lead her flight effectively. She used her superior tactical knowledge to predict the Red Force movements and position her aircraft advantageously. Her calm leadership under pressure impressed her wingmen and began to frustrate the attacking pilots. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, his tone betraying his growing irritation as Rachel's flight successfully countered each of his carefully planned attacks. He had expected her to become overwhelmed by the aggressive tactics, but instead she was demonstrating exactly the kind of skill and leadership that had earned her the coveted red flag assignment. The exercise continued for another 20 minutes, with the Red Force becoming increasingly desperate in their attempts to achieve a decisive victory over Rachel's outnumbered flight. Their tactics became more dangerous as they abandoned proper safety procedures in pursuit of their goal to humiliate her. Rachel documented each violation mentally, knowing that she would need to report these safety breaches after landing. As fuel levels began to reach return-to-base minimums, the exercise was called to a halt. Rachel's flight had not only survived the ambush, but had successfully defended their assigned area against overwhelming odds. Her tactical decisions and calm leadership had turned what was meant to be her humiliation into a demonstration of her exceptional piloting skills. During the recovery to base, radio chatter was noticeably subdued. The Red Force pilots seemed reluctant to discuss their performance, while Rachel's flight maintained professional communications. She could sense that something significant had occurred during the engagement, though she wasn't yet aware of the full scope of what had transpired. As they entered the traffic pattern for landing, Rachel reflected on the exercise. While she had successfully defended against the coordinated attack, she knew that the tactics employed against her had been dangerous and unprofessional. The question now was whether she should report the safety violations or handle the situation through unofficial channels. After landing and taxiing back to the flight line, Rachel completed her post-flight procedures and secured her aircraft. The tension on the ramp was palpable as pilots from both flights gathered for the standard debrief. Morrison's confident demeanor from earlier in the day had been replaced by a sullen expression that suggested his plan had not succeeded as intended. The formal debrief was conducted by Commander Thompson, who seemed reluctant to acknowledge Rachel's successful performance during the exercise. He glossed over the tactical details and focused instead on fuel consumption and communication procedures. Several pilots exchanged glances that suggested they knew more about the day's events than was being officially discussed. After the formal debrief concluded, Rachel was approached by Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, the squadron's senior intelligence officer. Hayes had been monitoring the exercise from the ground and had noticed several irregularities in the conduct of the engagement. She requested a private meeting with Rachel to discuss her observations and concerns about the safety violations she had witnessed. Rachel agreed to meet with Hayes, sensing that she might have an ally in addressing the unprofessional conduct she had experienced. As she walked toward the intelligence office, she noticed Morrison and several other pilots engaged in an animated discussion near the parking lot. Their agitated body language suggested that their plan had backfired significantly. In the privacy of the intelligence office, Hayes revealed that she had been documenting a pattern of harassment and unsafe practices directed at Rachel over the past several weeks. As the squadron's senior female officer, Hayes had been watching the situation closely and was prepared to take action if necessary. She explained that the day's exercise had crossed several red lines that demanded official response. Hayes showed Rachel radar recordings and communication transcripts from the exercise that clearly demonstrated the safety violations and coordinated nature of the attacks against her flight. The evidence was compelling and would be difficult for Morrison and his allies to explain away. Rachel realized that she now had the documentation needed to file a formal complaint if she chose to pursue that course of action. The two women discussed the potential consequences of filing an official report versus handling the matter through informal channels. Hayes emphasized that the safety violations alone were serious enough to warrant formal investigation, regardless of the underlying harassment issues. Rachel appreciated Hayes's support, but needed time to consider her options carefully. As Rachel drove home that evening, she reflected on the day's events and their broader implications. She had proven herself capable of handling whatever challenges Morrison and his allies could devise, but the question remained whether she should seek official justice or find another way to resolve the situation. The decision would have significant consequences for her career and her relationships within the squadron. That night, Rachel called her father in Texas to discuss the situation. As a veteran mechanic who had worked around military aircraft for decades, he understood the culture and politics of aviation units. His advice was characteristically direct. Document everything, trust her instincts, and never let anyone compromise her safety or the safety of others for their personal agenda. Her father's words resonated with Rachel as she realized that this wasn't just about her own career anymore. Morrison's willingness to create dangerous situations in pursuit of his personal vendetta posed a threat to every pilot in the squadron. She had a responsibility to ensure that such behavior was not allowed to continue unchecked. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the squadron early to review the previous day's flight data and prepare her report for Hayes. She wanted to ensure that her account was thorough and accurate, knowing that Morrison would likely attempt to discredit her version of events. As she worked in the quiet office, she heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Commander Thompson standing in the doorway. Thompson's expression was serious as he entered the office and closed the door behind him. He explained that he had received reports of irregularities during the previous day's exercise and wanted to hear Rachel's account of what had occurred. His tone was more professional than she had experienced in recent weeks, suggesting that the gravity of the situation had penetrated even his loyalty to Morrison. Rachel provided a measured and factual account of the exercise, focusing on the safety violations and tactical irregularities she had observed. She avoided making accusations about motives or conspiracies, instead presenting the facts and allowing Thompson to draw his own conclusions. Her professional demeanor seemed to impress him as he took careful notes of her statements. When Rachel finished her account, Thompson sat quietly for several minutes before responding. He acknowledged that the exercise had deviated from standard protocols and promised to investigate the matter thoroughly. However, his reluctance to discuss specifics suggested that he was still trying to protect Morrison while addressing the obvious problems that had occurred. After Thompson left, Rachel continued preparing her documentation for Hayes. She knew that the commander's investigation might not be entirely objective, given his personal relationship with Morrison. Having an independent record of events through the intelligence office would provide additional protection if the situation escalated further. Later that morning, Rachel was surprised to receive a visit from Captain James Mitchell, the commanding officer of a neighboring squadron. Mitchell had heard about the previous day's exercise through unofficial channels and was concerned about the implications for squadron safety standards. His interest in the situation suggested that word was spreading beyond VFA 143 about the irregular training practices. Mitchell's conversation with Rachel was informal but probing. He emphasized the importance of maintaining proper safety standards during training exercises and encouraged her to report any violations she had witnessed. His support gave Rachel additional confidence that pursuing official channels would be the right course of action. As the day progressed, Rachel noticed a shift in the squadron's atmosphere. Several pilots who had previously been neutral or even hostile toward her began approaching with expressions of respect and support. It seemed that her performance during the ambush exercise had finally earned the recognition she had been seeking through 2 years of dedicated service. Lieutenant Rodriguez was particularly supportive, expressing his admiration for how she had handled the dangerous situation. He revealed that several pilots had been uncomfortable with Morrison's plan, but had felt pressured to participate due to his influence within the squadron. Rodriguez's honesty helped Rachel understand the complex dynamics that had led to the previous day's events. During lunch, Rachel was approached by Lieutenant Wilson, one of her wingmen from the exercise. Wilson appeared nervous as he explained that he had overheard Morrison and Thompson discussing plans to transfer Rachel to a different assignment before she could file any formal complaints. This information confirmed Rachel's suspicions that the leadership was more concerned with protecting Morrison than addressing the safety issues he had created. Wilson's warning prompted Rachel to accelerate her timeline for meeting with Hayes and filing her report. She realized that waiting too long might allow Morrison's allies to undermine her position or manipulate the official record of events. The time for informal resolution had passed. Official action was now necessary to protect both her career and flight safety standards. That afternoon, Rachel met with Hayes to finalize her formal complaint. The intelligence officer had compiled additional evidence from radar recordings and maintenance logs that supported Rachel's account of the safety violations. Together, they prepared a comprehensive report that documented not only the immediate incident, but also the pattern of harassment that had preceded it. Hayes explained the formal complaint process and the potential consequences for all involved parties. While Rachel's career would likely benefit from vindication, Morrison and potentially Thompson could face serious disciplinary action or even removal from their positions. The scope of the investigation would depend on how high up the chain of command the matter was referred. As they completed the paperwork, Hayes shared her own experiences as a female officer in the male-dominated aviation community. Her insights helped Rachel understand that her situation was part of a larger struggle for equality and respect within the military. The outcome of her complaint could have implications far beyond their squadron. With the formal complaint filed, Rachel felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had taken a significant step that could not be reversed, and the consequences would unfold over the coming weeks and months. However, she was confident that she had made the right decision for herself, her fellow pilots, and the overall safety of their operations. The next few days passed quietly as the formal investigation began. Rachel continued her normal duties while trying to avoid speculation about the ongoing process. She noticed that Morrison seemed increasingly agitated and was spending more time in closed-door meetings with Thompson and other squadron leadership. On Friday afternoon, Rachel was summoned to meet with Colonel Patricia Barnes, the Air Wing commander. Barnes was known for her no-nonsense approach to leadership and her strong commitment to maintaining high standards throughout her command. The meeting would be Rachel's first opportunity to present her case to someone outside the squadron's internal politics. Colonel Barnes listened intently as Rachel provided her account of recent events. The colonel's questions were direct and focused on the specific safety violations, rather than the interpersonal conflicts that had contributed to the situation. Her professional approach gave Rachel confidence that the investigation would be conducted fairly and thoroughly. During their conversation, Barnes revealed that this was not the first complaint she had received about irregular training practices within VFA 143. Several other pilots had expressed concerns about safety standards and the squadron's leadership approach to training exercises. Rachel's formal complaint had provided the catalyst needed to address these systemic issues. Barnes explained that the investigation would be expanded beyond the specific incident, involving Rachel to examine the squadron's overall training culture and safety record. This broader scope meant that Morrison's behavior would be evaluated in the context of his overall impact on unit readiness and morale, rather than just his treatment of one individual pilot. As the meeting concluded, Barnes assured Rachel that she would be protected from any retaliation during the investigation process. The colonel also indicated that changes in squadron leadership were likely, regardless of the investigation's specific findings. The pattern of problems had reached a level that demanded decisive action. Rachel left the meeting feeling validated in her decision to file the formal complaint. Barnes' professional handling of the situation and commitment to addressing the underlying issues gave her hope that positive changes would result from her difficult decision to speak up about the harassment and safety violations. Over the weekend, Rachel received unexpected support from several squadron members who had previously remained neutral in the conflicts with Morrison. They expressed appreciation for her courage in addressing problems that had affected the entire unit's morale and effectiveness. Their support helped her realize that she had not been as isolated as she had believed. On Monday morning, Rachel arrived at work to find that Morrison had been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties pending the completion of the investigation. Commander Thompson was also being transferred to a desk position, while his role in recent events was evaluated. The swift action by higher command demonstrated that the allegations were being taken seriously. Lieutenant Commander Hayes briefed Rachel on the investigation's progress and the evidence that had been collected. The case against Morrison was strong, with multiple witnesses and technical data supporting the charges of harassment and safety violations. Thompson's involvement was still being evaluated, but his failure to address known problems had clearly compromised his leadership position. With Morrison removed from flight status, the squadron's atmosphere began to improve noticeably. Training exercises returned to standard safety protocols, and the hostile environment that had characterized recent months began to dissipate. Rachel found herself able to focus on her duties without constantly worrying about sabotage or harassment. The improvement in working conditions was reflected in the squadron's performance metrics, which began to show increases in mission readiness and pilot proficiency scores. The toxic leadership that had been dragging down the entire unit was finally being addressed, allowing the talented pilots to perform at their full potential. 3 weeks later, Rachel received notification that she had been selected for early promotion to major and assignment as a flight instructor at the Navy's elite Top Gun school. The prestigious assignment was recognition of her exceptional skills and leadership under pressure. More importantly, it represented validation that her decision to stand up to harassment had been the right choice. Morrison was ultimately court-martialed for conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, with specific charges related to the safety violations during the ambush exercise. His conviction resulted in dismissal from the Navy and loss of all benefits. Thompson received a letter of reprimand and was transferred to a non-flying administrative position for the remainder of his career. The investigation's findings were used to implement new training protocols and oversight procedures designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. Rachel's case became a model for how to properly address harassment and safety violations in military aviation units. Her courage in speaking up had created positive changes that would benefit countless future pilots. As Rachel prepared for her transfer to Top Gun, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The harassment and hostility she had endured had been painful, but her perseverance had ultimately led to both personal vindication and institutional change. She had proven that merit and determination could overcome prejudice and politics. Her father's advice about trusting her instincts and never compromising safety had proven wise. By maintaining her professional standards and refusing to be intimidated, Rachel had not only protected herself, but had also made her squadron safer for everyone. The shadow patch that Morrison and his allies had tried to cast over her career had instead illuminated their own failures. On her final day with VFA 143, Rachel was honored at a squadron ceremony attended by Colonel Barnes and other senior officers. The recognition from her peers and superiors was deeply meaningful, representing acceptance and respect that she had earned through exceptional performance under extremely difficult circumstances. As she walked to her aircraft for her final flight with the squadron, Rachel noticed a small group of female aviation cadets who had come to watch the ceremony. Their presence reminded her that her struggles had been about more than just her own career. She had helped pave the way for future generations of women in military aviation. The flight itself was perfect, with clear skies and smooth air that allowed Rachel to fully appreciate the F-18's capabilities one last time with her current unit. Her wingmen performed flawlessly, demonstrating the teamwork and professionalism that had ultimately prevailed over the toxic environment created by Morrison and his allies. After landing, Rachel completed her final debrief and turned in her squadron patch. The symbol that had once represented conflict and struggle would now be remembered as a place where she had fought for and achieved justice. Her legacy in VFA 143 would inspire future pilots to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. As Rachel drove away from Naval Air Station Oceana for the last time, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The shadow patch that had been intended to mark her as unworthy had instead become a symbol of her strength and integrity. She had transformed a situation designed to destroy her career into an opportunity for growth and positive change. Her new assignment at Top Gun would present different challenges, but Rachel was confident in her ability to handle whatever came next. The experience with Morrison had taught her valuable lessons about leadership, courage, and the importance of standing up for principle, even when it required personal sacrifice. The story of the ambush exercise and its aftermath would become part of Navy aviation lore, serving as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of toxic leadership and an inspiring example of how individual courage could create institutional change. Rachel Martinez had proven that the shadow patch on her wing was not a mark of shame, but a badge of honor earned through extraordinary service under the most challenging circumstances.